The signal was faint but unmistakable. It crackled through the Federation's communication channels, and SOS from a planet no one had heard of before. It was far outside the usual trade routes, beyond the rim of known space, where no one ever ventured. The data was patchy at best, fractured, broken pieces of information, all of it pointing to one thing: a catastrophic event. Something terrible was happening. A civilization was being torn apart by an unknown force with a violence that no one could comprehend. The signal kept coming, though its clarity faded, as if whatever was sending it was being consumed. As the seconds ticked away, the fleet commander, Captain Reese, stared at the message blinking on her screen. The words were distorted, but the desperation was undeniable. She had seen this before, not like this. But she knew what it meant. It meant death was coming, and it was coming fast. The Federation scrambled, sending a few of their best ships to investigate. But it was a long journey. There was no way they could make it in time. The signal seemed to die out a few hours later. But just before it disappeared, something strange happened. A burst of static followed by a low-frequency hum, as if something ancient had awakened in the darkness of space. Reese froze, her fingers hovering above the controls. The sound was something familiar, something from deep within the history books, something long thought lost. She had no explanation for it, but instinctively she knew the source was human. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be true. The fleet she commanded was the most advanced in the galaxy. But this was no Federation technology. This was something else, something older, something far more deadly and powerful. That burst of static gave way to a new signal, clearer now, a steady hum that resonated in her chest. It spoke no words, but its presence was undeniable. And then came the visuals. A blackened warship glided into view, massive beyond comprehension, its surface glistening like the surface of an obsidian moon. Its hull was lined with weapons the size of mountains, and as the camera zoomed in on the ship's hull, there was no mistaking it. The insignia was human. The markings were ancient, from a time long forgotten. The ship had to be a relic from the past, a ghost ship from a war humanity had fought before, when they had been far more brutal and unrelenting. Captain Reese stared at the screen in disbelief. What she was seeing was impossible. But there it was, an entire fleet hidden in the farthest corners of the galaxy, returning from the darkness. It had been lost to time. But it was not gone, it was not forgotten. And now it was answering the call of the unknown world in peril. It was a fleet built for annihilation, a fleet that had been humanity's last hope in a war that had nearly destroyed them all. And it had come back not to save, but to wage war and reclaim a future lost to time. The first ship in the fleet moved forward, breaking the silence with a hum that echoed across the communication network. The fleet was here, and it was human. The massive warships glided through space with an eerie silence. Their engines thrummed beneath the surface, but the void around them was still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. No one could deny the power of these ships. Their sheer size alone struck terror into anyone who dared to gaze upon them. These were not the sleek and efficient designs of the Federation. These ships were ancient, built for something far greater, something far more brutal. They had been forged in the fires of war, an old war, a war that humanity had nearly lost. But the ships had survived. Their crews had survived, hidden deep in the folds of space, forgotten by all but a few. The Federation ever knew about them. No records, no whispers in the halls of command. They were considered myth until now. The ships were adorned with the old markings of humanity's past, worn and weathered, but still unmistakable. The crew that manned them were unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. Their eyes were cold, their movements precise. They were not soldiers of a new age, but warriors of a bygone era. Their training was brutal, their resolve unshakable. These were the descendants of the first humans who had sailed these ships. They were born to fight and die for their people, and they had inherited the bloodline of legends. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Celine Voss, a descendant of the original fleet's leader. She had been raised to know the weight of the history that rested on her shoulders. Her hands gripped the console in front of her, steady and unyielding as her ship made its way toward the uncharted planet. She could feel the presence of her ancestors all around her, the same resolve that had driven them to victory in the past, now pulsed through her veins. She knew what was at stake. The alien force that had ravaged the colony would not be deterred by negotiation or peace. They were a scourge, a plague that could only be eradicated with fire and steel, and these ships had been built for that very purpose. The humans aboard these warships had seen horrors beyond the comprehension of most in the galaxy. Their ancestors had faced down a threat so great it had nearly wiped them out, but they had prevailed, and now it was their time again. The fleet moved forward, breaking through the darkness of space, their weapons powered up, ready for war. They had no time to waste. The Federation had no chance against the enemy. They were about to face. Their fleets were too scattered, too weak, too unprepared. The Federation was built on diplomacy and trade. It was a bureaucracy, not a fighting force. But the humans aboard the fleet of the Lost knew something no one else did. Humanity was not a species to be taken lightly. The ancient fleet had come back, not just to defend, but to dominate. They would not let another alien race erase their legacy. They had been born from the ashes of defeat and reborn in the fire of vengeance. They would make sure no one would ever forget that humanity was not weak. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. Humanity was the deadliest force in the galaxy, and nothing would stand in their way. As the human fleet descended into the planet's atmosphere, the sight that greeted them was horrifying. The alien forces had overrun every inch of the colony. Their ships, like twisted metal and bone, roamed the skies in search of survivors. Their ground troops swarmed the remains of once bustling cities, now reduced to rubble. The aliens were insectoid in appearance, their bodies covered in thick chitinous armor, their faces obscured by dark reflective helmets. Their movements were precise and mechanical. There was no emotion in their actions, only an insatiable drive to destroy the humans who had once dared to stand against them. The Zoreth. They were called an ancient race, born from the dark corners of space. Their hunger for conquest had led them to consume entire worlds, and now humanity's time had come. They had studied their enemy, but nothing had prepared them for the scale of the devastation. The Zoreth were not just an alien threat, they were a nightmare made real. Their weapons could drain the energy of any ship caught within their field. Their ships were self-replicating, designed to overwhelm anything in their path, and they had already taken out several nearby Federation outposts. And now they had found humanity. The humans aboard the ancient fleet watched as the alien ships circled the planet, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. As they rained destruction down on the ground, the survivors in their underground bunkers could only wait and pray, hoping against hope that help would arrive. But the Zoreth had already begun to strip the planet of its resources, their machines sucking the very life from the soil, turning the once fertile world into a barren wasteland. The humans knew that the Federation could not save them. The reinforcements were too far out, and even if they arrived, it would be too late. The Federation's fleets were designed for defense and diplomacy. They were not prepared for an invasion of this scale. They had not seen anything like the Zoreth before. But the humans aboard the Lost Fleet knew the enemy's true nature. They knew how to fight them. They had fought enemies like this before. The humans were not afraid, not of the Zoreth, not of their numbers, not of their technology. They had survived worse, and they would survive again. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, her eyes locked on the Zoreth ships. As they moved closer to the planet, her crew was ready, every hand on deck was steady, every mind focused. They had been born for this moment. Their training was instinct, their strategy was flawless. The first wave of attack ships was deployed, small and nimble, designed to strike fast and disappear into the darkness of space. The Zoreth would not know what hit them. The human fleet had the advantage of surprise, and they would use it to its fullest. The battle would not be fought in the open. The Zoreth were too strong for that, but the humans had their own tricks. They would draw the enemy in, they would let them think they had the upper hand, and then they would strike harder than they had ever struck before. The humans had something the Zoreth did not. They had the will to fight back, and they had the fury of generations of warriors burning in their hearts. The ancient fleet was ready, and they would not go quietly into the night. The first strike came without warning. The human ships moved like shadows in the night, their stealth systems cloaking them from the alien sensors. The Zorath had no idea what hit them. Their ships exploded one by one as the humans hit fast and hard from every angle. The Zorath were used to brute force to overwhelming numbers, but they had never faced this kind of attack. Before, the humans didn't play by any rules. They didn't fight the way the Zorath expected. The human fleet unleashed hell from every direction. Hit-and-run tactics, precise surgical strikes that left the enemy scrambling to respond. Their ships were torn apart in an instant as the humans took advantage of every weak point. Their weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy. Nothing was wasted. Every shot counted. The Zorath had no idea how to react. They were used to destroying planets. They were used to dominating entire systems. But the humans weren't fighting for dominance. They were fighting for survival, and survival was all they needed. Their ships darted across the sky like wolves attacking a much larger prey. Their cannons ripped through Zorath ships with ease, while smaller attack crafts swarmed in to finish what the heavy hitters had started. It was chaos, but it was controlled. It was a symphony of destruction that only the most seasoned warriors could conduct. The Zorath began to retreat, trying to regroup, trying to form some kind of defense. But it was too late. The humans had them on the ropes, and they weren't going to let up. The first battle was only a taste of what was to come. The Zorath ships started to fall back into a defensive position, trying to recover their numbers, trying to pull together what was left of their forces. But the humans didn't give them time to recover. The fleet pressed on. They were relentless. They had learned this lesson long ago. Never give the enemy a chance to breathe. Never let them get back on their feet. Once they were down, they stayed down. Admiral Voss was everywhere on the battlefield, guiding her fleet with the precision of a master tactician. She watched as the battle unfolded. Her orders were simple: crush them with everything they had, leave nothing behind but the wreckage of their ships and their pride. As the humans closed in on the last of the Zorath vessels, they began to feel the weight of their actions. The Zorath had been a powerful force. They had taken out dozens of Federation ships. But here in this battle, the tide had turned. The alien fleet was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The Zorath scattered like ants fleeing from a predator. But the humans had no mercy. The humans had one goal now: to wipe them from existence, to make sure that their last memory of the Zorath was one of terror and regret. The humans didn't stop even when the battle was all but won. They kept pushing, they kept fighting until every Zorath ship was destroyed. The planet's surface was still burning, but the skies above had cleared. The human fleet had turned the tide and crushed the invaders. The humans had not just won a battle, they had proven something to the galaxy. They had proven that they were not the helpless prey they had once been. They were the apex predators. And the Zorath had learned the hard way that no one could stand against the fury of humanity's wrath. The battle was over, but the air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal across the planet. The Zorath had been broken. Their ships, now nothing more than wreckage, scattered across the skies. The human fleet hovered above a silent victory as the last of the Zorath forces were hunted down. Their shattered ships drifted like debris. And then silence fell. The survivors of the colony emerged from their hiding places, their faces covered in grime, their eyes wide in disbelief, as they gazed at the fleet of ancient warships that had saved them. The ships loomed like titans in the sky, their hulls scared from battle, their weapons silent. But still the sight of them filled the survivors with awe. They had seen the destruction the Zorath had caused. They had watched helplessly as entire cities had been reduced to ash. They had feared that no one would come, but now they were free. The humans had come from the dark reaches of the galaxy. They had come from the forgotten edges of space, and they had saved them. But it wasn't just the survivors who were left in awe. The entire galaxy was watching as the human fleet turned and began its slow retreat back into the vastness of space. The Federation would take credit for the victory, but it was clear to everyone that it was not their ships that had won the day. It was the ancient fleet, the lost fleet, the legacy of humanity's greatest warriors. The fleets of the Federation were built for defense and diplomacy, but the fleet of the lost was built for war. It was a weapon of vengeance, a tool forged in the fires of humanity's darkest hours, and now it had returned to remind the galaxy of humanity's true power. The victory was not just in the destruction of the Zorath, but in the message it sent across the stars, humanity was not weak, humanity was not fragile, humanity was not a species to be overlooked anymore. The Federation's fleets would return to their roles of maintaining peace and order. But the fleet of the lost would remain hidden in the shadows. It would remain as a reminder to any species who thought of underestimating humanity that the price for such a mistake would be far too high. As the human warships disappeared into the depths of space, their engines glowing bright in the darkness, Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of her flagship, her expression unreadable. As she looked out at the stars in front of her, her mission had been clear, and now it was complete. Humanity had proven its place among the stars, but there would be no celebration, no fanfare. The fleet would return to the quiet corners of space where they had been born, and where they would wait until they were needed again. The galaxy would change because of what had happened today. The balance of power had shifted. Humanity was no longer an afterthought or a colony of helpless beings scrambling to survive. Humanity was a force that had proven itself, and that force would not be forgotten. The warships disappeared into the void as the survivors of the colony looked up at the stars, knowing that the universe had just become a much more dangerous place. But they had nothing to fear, because humanity had risen, and humanity had shown them all that they were no longer prey, they were the predators.